Week 11 of the fantasy football season. He's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So this season, he's been one of the best running backs in all fantasy football is Christian McCaffrey. Him and Jonathan Taylor atop the list this season. Taylor on bye, so McCaffrey with a good matchup at the Arizona Cardinals where their run defense isn't all that great. And McCaffrey, we know he can do it all out of the backfield, and health has been the only issue throughout his career. This week, I think he goes out there and is a big game. Number 2, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So last week he did get vultured for 2 touchdowns in that game versus the Indianapolis Colts was Bijan Robinson. This week a good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Bijan, the only thing with him is we just have to see more touchdowns from him. Everything else, he's doing solid this season. Yards per carry are good. Catching the football, he's been solid this year. This week versus Carolina, we'll see if he can find the end zone. Number 3, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So Josh Jacobs, the only guy you really could trust on this Packer offense now. We saw a bad loss, 10-7 on Monday Night Football to the Eagles in Week 10. But Josh Jacobs, he still had a good game. I know he had a fumble at the end, but he wasn't getting the first down anyway to end that ball game. And this week, it's a slam dunk matchup with the New York Giants that can't stop anyone. So like I said, Jacobs, he's getting a lot of work this season, and he's the number 1 option in this offense where they run first team is Green Bay. Number 4, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. It's been a great season for Devon Achane in a lost season and a bad season for this Miami Dolphin team. So last week he ran wild with Achane, had 40 fantasy points in PPR leagues, and this week a good matchup versus the Commanders that can't stop anyone. And we just saw Jahmyr Gibbs light him up for a big game. Number 5, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Gibbs, he had a couple bad games, and then last week he went out there in Washington and had a monster game. So now with Dan Campbell making them play calls, we'll see if this offense gets more aggressive and gives the football even more, and that's what we saw in last week's ball game. So this week, definitely a tough matchup with Philadelphia, one of the better defenses in the league, but still I could see this be a potential high-scoring game between these two offenses. Number 6, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook, it's been a solid season for him. Last week, it was just a game, you throw the tape out, and whatever happened in that one, they were maybe over too confident, or the Dolphins treated that game like it was their Super Bowl. But everyone had a down game for Buffalo. So this week, it's going to be a matchup versus Tampa Bay coming in. We know their run defense isn't great. It's Tampa Bay. We saw Trevion Henderson last week go out there and explode for over 150 yards on the ground. So James Cook, we know he's a solid back, and you rarely see 2 bad games in a row from him. Number 7, Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. Rico Dowdle, he's been a consistent running back all season long for this Panther team and fantasy owners. And going back to week 5 and 6, this is where he took the job over. 200 yards from scrimmage total and never looked back. So this week a good matchup with the Falcons that just gave up over 200 yards on the ground to Jonathan Taylor. And I think Dowdle will go out there and have a big game. Number 8, Ashton Jeanty, Las Vegas Raiders. This week a slam dunk matchup with the Dallas Cowboys coming in on Monday Night Football. And Ashton Jeanty, he's been a solid running back, I believe, this season in his rookie season. So like I said, Dallas, they can't stop the run. I know they traded for Quinnen Williams. I know Zonovan Wilson they traded for as well. But Quinnen Williams definitely in the run game. He could be a big factor to help this defense. But I think in this one, Ashton Jeanty's going to have his way regardless and have a big game, one of his better games of the year. Number 9, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he's high on the list this week as well as Jaylen Warren. But I'm going off matchup, and the Cincinnati Bengals give up the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. Jaylen Warren, he's the bell cow over here in Pittsburgh. And not much is going on as well in Pittsburgh, where they're not doing a lot. Is this Pittsburgh Steelers team offensively? DK Metcalf, the last couple weeks, his numbers have gone down. Jaylen Warren's pretty much been the most consistent guy. And this week, like I said, with Cincinnati coming in, and this could be a high-scoring game once again between these two teams like we saw a few weeks ago on Thursday night. I like him as a top 10 option. Number 10, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. It's been a solid season in his first year with Dallas for Javonte Williams. And when you play behind an offensive line like the Cowboys have, and also with guys like CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens and Jake Ferguson, it opens up everything in the offense where teams aren't going to stack the box. So this week in a great matchup at the Vegas Raiders, I think Williams will go out there and rumble again. Number 11, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So definitely a down season for Barkley. But obviously, you know he wasn't going to do what he did last season, 2,000 yards. But we have only seen one big game, over 20 fantasy points for Saquon Barkley. So this week, mediocre matchup versus the Detroit Lions. Their defense is middle of the pack versus the run. But I think Barkley, he could go out there and have a decent game still. But I'm not saying those elite numbers like we've seen last season going to be there week in and week out anymore. Number 12, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry got bottled up early in the season versus the Cleveland Browns, and we know their run defense for the most part has been a solid unit this season. So Derrick Henry, the only thing with him, touchdowns haven't been there. The rushing yards have been there, and also, he's not going to catch the football out of the backfield. So let's say he even gets 100 yards on the ground, but no touchdown. That's only 10 fantasy points for Derrick Henry. So like I said, his numbers are down if he's not scoring the touchdown and catching the football out of the backfield. But in real life, the yards per carry is solid and he's playing good. But like I said, fantasy point-wise, not that great. 13, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Brown, the last couple weeks, this whole offense has turned it around and put up some big numbers for the Cincinnati Bengal team. So this week a matchup at Pittsburgh. Chase Brown, he's the workhorse. I know Samaje Perine, he was starting to get some work, but still Chase Brown, he's going to catch the football out of the backfield. Quick running back in between the tackles. And this week at Pittsburgh, this could be a potential high-scoring game between these two teams. 14, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, he's having a good season. Once again, he signed that contract extension in the offseason. I know Blake Corum's into the workload at times, but Kyren's still getting his 15, 20 touches a game, making plays in the end zone. And this week versus Seattle, I think Williams will go out there once again and put in a solid performance. 15, Trevion Henderson of the New England Patriots. So hopefully after that monster game he had at Tampa Bay last week, where he looks like one of the quickest backs in the league, and we know the upside and playmaking ability that Mike Vrabel and this coaching staff just says, let this kid go and let him play, because last week over 170 yards on the ground, found the end zone twice. Stevenson possibly could return, but I don't think he will on a short week where they could hold him out one more week with the toe. So this week in a good matchup versus the New York Jets, I like Henderson once again to go out there and be a solid RB2. I'm not going to say he's going to put up number one numbers like last week, but an RB2 for owners is a good spot for him. 16, Kamini Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Vidal, 2 full starts on the year. He's had 2 good games. He had a dud a couple weeks ago, week 9 at Tennessee. And then last week versus Steelers, a good run defense. Vidal went out there and he made some big plays and found the end zone as well. So this week, good matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Defense that really can't stop anyone. And Vidal, he could do it all, running between the tackles, catch the football out of the backfield. But most likely with Hampton coming back in week 13, this will be the last week for fantasy owners to use Vidal, where they have the bye. Next week is Los Angeles. 17, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So Breece Hall, he wasn't traded at the deadline. The Kansas City Chiefs wanted him, but didn't want to give up a third-round pick for him. And this week, it's not a great matchup in New England, one of the better run defenses in the league, where last week we saw them bottle up Rachaad White in terms of yards per carry in that game. So Breece Hall, I want to see a little bit more out of him in the receiving game, where we haven't seen that, even though last week he did have the 142-yard screen pass for a touchdown. But besides that, he didn't catch another pass. So I think Hall this week in New England on volume will get into some points. 18, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So Monangai, he's not going to be a factor in this backfield. DeAndre Swift pretty much carried 80% of the touches in that game. I know Monangai found the end zone in last week's game versus the Giants, but Swift, he could do it all. And this week it's a good matchup versus a division foe he's very familiar with, going back to even his Detroit Lion days at Minnesota. And we saw Minnesota last week. They couldn't stop Derrick Henry in that game. 19, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a tougher matchup this week versus the Chargers. Their defense last week shut down Pittsburgh's offense until garbage time in that one. But Etienne, he's having a solid season. With that trade of Bigsby early in the season, that helped him out as well in fantasy football. And also Bashal Tutin really hasn't done much. I think the volume will be there once again for Etienne, and he could catch some passes out of the backfield as well. 20, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. So Judkins, maybe I'm a little lower on him than consensus this week. He has Quinshon Judkins, but it's a tough matchup in terms of the way the game script's going to go. And last week versus the New York Jets, it wasn't much of a ball game for Quinshon Judkins. And the other thing with him as well, he's not much of a receiver out of the backfield. I still think he's a solid RB2 for fantasy owners. But this week in a game where they could be trailing early and often versus the Ravens, I don't see Judkins having a high ceiling. 21, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucky Irvin, once again, he's out in this week's game, dealing with ankle and shoulder injuries. Rachaad White was bottled up last week, but in terms of catching the football out of the backfield, one of the better receiving backs in the league. And this week, a pretty good matchup at the Buffalo Bills, where their run defense hasn't stopped anyone this season. We saw Devon Achane go over 150 yards on the ground last week versus the Steelers. I still think White, Even though he's not great in yards per carry, he's versing a bad run defense and is a good RB2 for owners. 22 Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, he's taken over now in this backfield. Jordan Mason was a factor early in the season when Jones was healthy. Then Jones, he missed 4 games with injury. But now since he's come back to the lineup, he's played solid as Aaron Jones. And obviously could catch the football out of the backfield, which is a plus, where Jordan Mason doesn't really do that. So this week, versus division rival, the Bears, which he's very familiar with, going back to his Green Bay days as well, I think Jones is a solid RB2. 23, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. So Woody Marks, in my opinion, better back in this backfield between him and Nick Chubb. Catch the football out of the backfield. His pass protection's getting a little bit better. And he just has more juice in between the tackles, where Nick Chubb, we know, has had devastating knee injuries throughout his career. So this week, good matchup with the Tennessee Titans, one of the worst teams in the league. A defense that really isn't all that good. And I think Marks, he could go out there, have another good game this week. 24, RJ Harvey of the Denver Broncos. So it's not looking good right now for J.K. Dobbins, with reports coming out. Is a possibility he might go on IR, is Dobbins. So for at least this week, he's definitely out as J.K. Dobbins. He was shaken up in the last ball game on Thursday Night Football in Week 10 versus the Vegas Raiders with an ankle injury. And now it's RJ Harvey's time to see what he could do going out there as RJ Harvey. So Harvey, we know he could catch the football out of the backfield. We know he could make some plays, and he was a second-round pick in the NFL draft. But this week it is a tough matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But like I said, if Harvey's going to be the guy now in the backfield, we've seen him this season have some big games with limited touches. 25 for Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kareem Hunt, he's going to start once again for this Kansas City Chiefs team. Isaiah Pacheco, it's not looking good that he's going to practice and play this week. Reports are coming out from Kansas City. And also they had the bye week last week. Still didn't heal 100% with the MCO is Pacheco. So Kareem Hunt, if you have to put him in your lineup, you hope he just plops into the end zone for a goal line touchdown, because his ceiling this season really hasn't been high. 26, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So Montgomery, he's still getting 12, 16 touches per game range for this Detroit Lion team. But the thing is, if he's not finding the end zone, it's not been that effective of a season for David Montgomery. So I know he's had a couple double-digit fantasy point games here and there, is David Montgomery. But like I said, it's Jahmyr Gibbs' backfield. He don't really catch the football out of the backfield. And also his yards per carry hasn't been all that great, where it fluctuates week from week. 27, Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. So last week I thought there was a chance for Trey Benson to return to the lineup. And this week I think there's an okay opportunity for Benson to return for this Arizona Cardinal team. So right now, Arizona, the last few weeks they've been going with a committee of DeMercado, Michael Carter, Bam Knight in and out of the lineup. Last week we saw Bam Knight, he got shooken up in that ball game with the ankle with Seattle. So I think Trey Benson, it'll be a good time for him to come back. And he's already served the 4 games on IR with the injury. So this week versus the Niners, if he's back in action, it's an okay matchup to return to. 28, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. So Charbonnet, the better running back tone over here in Seattle, in my opinion. Charbonnet, at least he's going to have that goal line appeal and get the goal line touches. And last week was a decent ball game for Charbonnet. But this week, a tough matchup at the Los Angeles Rams. The upside of this backfield isn't great, where it's a pass-first team for the most part, led by Jackson Smith-Njigba with Sam Darnold. But this week, like I said, you hope Charbonnet, he gets his 10, 15 touches and finds the end zone. 29, Tyjae Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So Tyjae Spears, in my opinion, is the better back tone over here in Tennessee. They're going to be trailing early and often. Most likely the remainder of the season is this Tennessee Titan team. I know this week it's a matchup versus Houston, where their offense isn't all that great, where this could actually be a tight division game for a little bit. But like I said, Spears, more upside. Tony Pollard not really catching the football out of the backfield, where he's strictly just kept running in between the tackles. 30, Bill Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders. It's still Krosky-Merritt's backfield over here in Washington, but the last 4 or 5 weeks, we really haven't seen a game out of Krosky-Merritt. He don't catch the football out of the backfield. And this Commander team's been trailing majority of the season, 3-7 on the year, where they got to pass a lot. And obviously that takes away from Krosky-Merritt, where he doesn't do much in the receiving game. But this week in a decent matchup versus Miami, if you're in a pinch as a flex option, maybe you put him in the lineup. 31, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. It's definitely been a down year for Kenneth Walker. 50-50 split with him and Zach Charbonnet. And the thing with Walker, you don't even catch the football. Where pretty much they don't use their running backs at all in the receiving game, it seems like, is the Seattle Seahawks team. And actually, why would you when you got a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba? They just traded for Rashid Shaheed last week at the deadline. So like I said, The receiving upside isn't there for these backs, and Charbonnet, like I said early in the video, is a guy could depend on more than Walker with that goal line appeal. 32, Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans. His best days are behind him, unfortunately, with a lot of injuries over the last couple seasons, especially to the knee last year, blowing it out totally with the Cleveland Browns. And this week it's a decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans, but in my opinion, Woody Marks is the better back. Could catch the football out of the backfield. He's getting better in between the tackles, and his pass protection's improved as well. So with all those factors, and like I said, if Nick Chubb's not scoring a goal line touchdown as well, he don't have much value. 33, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So like I said early in the video, Tony Pollard, he's not going to do much for fantasy owners. Once they're down 10, 14 points, they abandon the run, obviously, and Pollard's just not catching the football, not writing a lot of plays up for him to get open and make plays in the receiving game. So this week versus Houston, I expect more of the same, where early on it could be a tight game, and then in that second half, they abandon the run. Is Tennessee. 34, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. So Tracy and Singletary, I have it 34 and 35 here. It's a 50-50 split between these two running backs. With the most part, Tyrone Tracy, the better receiver out of the backfield and a more explosive running back. But in terms of short yardage and possibly goal line touches, I think the advantage will go there to Singletary. But if you have to put one of these guys in your lineup, your team's either pretty bad or you're banged up and have a couple guys on bye, even though it's only a 2-team bye week and it's a tough matchup versus Green Bay. 36 and final backup rankings, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. Algier last week, he stole 2 goal line touchdowns from Bijan Robinson, but his usage has just been weird all season long as Tyler Algier. There's some games he's getting 11 to 15 touches, and they've been close games, and then some games 2 to 5 touches we've seen him get. But this week versus Carolina, I think they're going to use both these running backs once again, where last week they ran the football 30 times was this Atlanta Falcon team, and this week in a division matchup back home, maybe Algier in deeper leagues, you want to put him in the lineup. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for week 11 of the fantasy football season.